Hello and welcome to True Faith's brand new YouTube discussion show, where we'll be talking about matters in the wider football world and then linking them back to Newcastle United and discussing what impact they might have. Tonight, I'm your host. I'm Daniel Wales. I'm a lifelong Newcastle United supporter and a season ticket holder since 2011. Just before I get on to introducing my guest tonight, if you do want to do something like this for True Faith and be a part of it, head to True Faith's Twitter and get in touch. Tonight, I am joined by three guests. I'm joined by Stephen Simm, Rob Mcgregor, and Lee Forster. I'll let each of them now introduce themselves. Starting with Stephen.
Yep, I'm Stephen. I've supported Newcastle for about 25 years. I think my earliest memory of watching Newcastle is when we hammered Barcelona. Well, I say hammered. Beat Barcelona 3-2. Tino's special. Just been suffering ever since.
Lee, if you'd like to go.
I'm a bit longer in the tooth than Stephen. Attended my first match in 1983 when Keegan was still wearing the kit for us. Season ticket holder with me, 16-year-old lad for the last few years, and I've been writing for True Faith now for about 3 or 4 months.
And finally, Rob.
Yeah, I'm Rob. Evening, gents. Everybody at home. I live down near Peterborough, as it happens, but Newcastle were the first team I saw live in, I want to say it was 1989. I think I was too young to really remember who they were playing against or any of the Newcastle stars from that time, but I remember being hooked straight away. So they became my team, even though, as I say, I'm a couple of 100 miles down south. I've been following ever since through highs and mostly lows, I think it's fair to say, but still here, and recently started writing for True Faith as well a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
you guys make me feel old.
I was born in 1983, Lee.
Makes me feel really young. Anyway, thank you all very much for introducing yourselves. So our first topic tonight, lads, is football being played in empty stadiums. The reasons for this are, of course, obvious. However, it is clear that football certainly isn't the same. So what do we all think of football at the present time with no fans?
I personally am finding it more and more difficult to get invested in it. And I know that's a weird thing when you're sat on your sofa watching it on TV, but it's just, I feel my celebrations when we score are tempered compared to what they potentially would have been pre-lockdown if I was watching a away game that I wasn't going to. For example, it's clearly very, very sterile, and it's not the same. It's not the same.
I'd say the same. You know, you think when at the match, whether it be home or away, when a goal goes in, you jump up and you go a little bit mad. But anything more than a fist bump at the minute is something that I do. I don't know what the rest of you do when Newcastle score. Well, not that we've scored a lot lately, but you know.
I think the thing that I found it easier, if that's the right word, with the artificial crowd noises. I know I may be in the minority for that, but I
have
watched
them on.
I watched the Dortmund Schalke game from last season, with the first game when professional football started back in Europe, and they hadn't got the artificial crowd being pumped back in, and it was weird. It was uncomfortably weird. I basically sat in a quiet room because my wife and daughter aren't really interested, so I sat here on my own watching this game, this eerie silence. And even when the players scored, they yell, and you can pick them up on the pitch side mics, but it was a weird sensation. So I'm almost grateful of the fake noises at this point, just because there's that kind of background sound that we're so used to. It isn't the same. It's clearly not the same from a fan experience, but I've kind of come to almost rely on those fake noises, and even sometimes amused by the bit where the guy doing the sound effects is slightly out of sync with the game. So the ball goes sailing over the bar, and then 2 seconds later, there's a ooh. It's a strange experience all around being in this lockdown. But I've come to love the artificial sounds in a strange sort of way.
Stephen, what are your thoughts? Yeah.
Well, in terms of the artificial noise, it's got to the point now where it actually annoys me because it just sounds like static. It's like leaving the TV on for too long, or leaving one of the old televisions on for too long, and then just the picture going off and all you hear is so it really annoys me. But my first game watching where fans weren't allowed to attend was my wife supports Wolves, so it was a European game. I can't remember who they were playing, but that was my first experience, and it was actually quite. It wasn't. It was quite sickening. Like it made you feel a little bit depressed because even though I'm based in Exeter, so I don't get to Newcastle games as regularly as I used to. So I've been watching football on telly for quite a while now, without being able to go. But even then, watching that game, it just felt like, well, a massive part of the game being removed. And you didn't really appreciate how important the fans were until they weren't actually being allowed to go, and how important that crowd noise is, even on TV. And I think you could tell that the players were impacted as well, even when the first few games where the fans weren't allowed in, the players didn't even know how to celebrate. They ran towards the stands and suddenly realised, oh, I'm looking like a bit of an idiot here. I'm just celebrating nobody. But I don't know. It's so crucial that we get fans back as quick as we can, because in terms of everyone who follows football, it's a release, isn't it? You know, you work through the week. I mean, it's that old cliche. You work through the week for the weekend. But us as Newcastle fans and people who follow football, all you're looking forward to is Saturday afternoon, or well, whenever Sky decide to show it, Sunday afternoon, whenever. A few drinks with your friends, and hopefully your football team wins. And there's no feeling like it coming out of the stadium with other fans singing and celebrating, and you can't do that in your living room. You can't really. I mean, you ring your friends afterwards to discuss it, or you might watch it together on FaceTime or whatever. But it's not the same. It's not the same.
I'd go as far as to say whoever wins the league this season, and let's be honest, it's looking like Man City. I would go as far to say that I would class them as false champions, because this isn't a normal season. You've lost any home advantage. All teams have lost any form of home advantage. I mean, you've got Liverpool, who are 10 points behind Man City as it stands. So you've got a game in hand. You can't tell me that Liverpool wouldn't be closer to Man City in the league if they had 50,000 Liverpool fans behind them in the ground. I think the game on Sunday, when they got, let's be honest, walloped by Man City, that's a different game. That's a different game when you've got 50,000 Scousers behind you. The loss to Brighton, again, to 50,000 Scousers, it's a different game altogether. And I think it's created a false playing field, not a far more equal playing field. I just think the fans not only create more atmosphere, but teams are, you talk about 12th man. It's what you call it. It's not an urban myth, that's a fact. If you've got a crowd behind you, it motivates the players and you'll get that extra 5 or 10% out of the team. Case in point would have been Saturday. I mean, that would have been absolutely crazy on Saturday at Southampton for the last 30 minutes, 10 men, and then down to 9 men. The atmosphere would have been electric. And I just think, as I say, for me, whoever wins the league this season, yeah, they've won the league, deservedly so, no doubt, but I always see them as a little bit of a false champion as such. I don't doubt for a second if we've got any Liverpool fans or Man City fans watching this, they'll be calling me all the names under the sun. But I just think it paints a false impression of the league without fans.
Do you think that with a club like Newcastle United that are so famed for our loyal and passionate fan base, that we are a bit of a loss, considering that we don't have 50,000 Geordies screaming for the team in St James's Park?
No, because we're shite anyway.
With that being said, did you not think, even with us not being brilliant at the moment, having that 12th man would maybe have changed a few of the results that we've had, for example, maybe against Leeds when we were on the front foot, or against Crystal Palace, into points winning games?
I think it might change Steve Bruce's position if there were 50,000 odd people being very vocal, shall we say, about their opinion of how Newcastle United have been playing this season. I think having that empty stadium, the silence, is not necessarily creating a false impression of how people feel about Steve Bruce, because you can see that online. But I think there's something very visceral about having a crowd booing their own team, which, let's face it, probably would have happened several times this season at St James's Park through the performances that we've seen. And it does go both ways. The Crystal Palace game might have been different, as you say, Dan, the Leeds game as well. But I can't help but wonder what effect it would have had on the management situation if you'd suddenly had a stadium full of people, because inevitably St James's Park is always full, regardless of how good or bad the football is. People still turn up through hell or high water. But would that have put pressure on Bruce himself, or more pressure, should I say? And would it put more pressure on Lee Charnley and Mike Ashley to act in regards to the management situation?
I think as well. Sorry, I think
All right.
From this perspective, you look at people, you look at the likes of Gary Neville and other pundits on Sky Sports. They haven't been super critical of Bruce, and I think if you've got 52,000 fans in that stadium, or sorry, got 40-odd thousand Newcastle fans booing, and I mean, I don't boo myself. It's not something that I particularly condone. I don't think it's right, whoever the manager is. But if you've got a lot of Newcastle fans who aren't happy in the stadium, making a lot of noise, making themselves heard, I think that encourages the pundits to maybe even just say, well, you can tell the Newcastle fans aren't happy. Is it time for Bruce to walk? Is it time for Bruce to be sacked? The fans aren't happy with him. So it sort of gives them that little bit of a push to make those comments, because at the moment, they're just basing their opinions on the football that they're watching, and the fact that some of them are obviously friends with Bruce, so they're not going to be critical of him personally. But I think if there was loads of fans there getting on the team's back, getting on Bruce's back, maybe some of the pundits would be a bit more inclined to say maybe Newcastle need to change. Because I think that's happened in the past. I think you've Newcastle fans can have an influence on Ashley's decision. I think in the end, you look at McLaren when he was sacked. Obviously, a lot of Newcastle fans wanted to see him gone a long time before he was sacked. And I think in the end, Mike Ashley would have been looking at the situation thinking, maybe in terms of Steve Bruce, maybe it is time for me to make a change. And I think the fans can influence that.
I think away from the Bruce situation, as much as we can have a positive impact as well on the team, I think we could have an equally negative impact. There's a number of games this season where Bruce and probably the team would have got the same treatment that Pardew got against Cardiff, when he was basically chased into his dugout. Now that does as well, that rubs off on the team. You've got players in that team who might go into the showers, can't play under pressure when the fans are when it's the ground's so toxic. So the results, I mean, the team, as daft as it sounds, might have actually benefited from the fact that they've not got 50,000 pissed off Geordies sort of venting the spleen at St James's Park. It's given that element of, well, if I misplace this pass or if I miscontrol something, I'm not going to get destroyed by the East Stand or the Gallagher end. I mean, Joe Linton, potentially, he must have been absolutely crapping himself every time he walked onto the pitch for the full stadium. So as much as we can be a force for good when things are going well, I think we can also be a negative force on the team and their confidence. So I think there's different ways of looking at it. But I think Bruce knows, and I think the press know that Bruce probably would have been peddled by now had we had 50,000 Geordies in there week in, week out, because let's be honest, his position would be untenable if it isn't already.
Now, obviously, we've mentioned the empty stadiums, and just to move things on a little bit, I think we'll go into our next topic here now, which is the recent takeover of Burnley by ALK Capital, which is a US consortium. Burnley were taken over recently by this consortium for about 200 million. I think the official figure was about 170 to be precise. However, a recent Guardian article has stated that this has actually made the club a bit worse off and has put them in some debt. I think £90 million was reported by the Guardian. So firstly, what do we make of this? Does it suggest that after takeovers, the grass isn't always greener? Stephen, what do you make of this?
It just surprises me that the Premier League maybe has allowed this to happen. Did they know that the new owners were going to seek financial support elsewhere? Did they know that they were going to put Burnley in £90 million worth of debt? If they did know that, then it's really irresponsible. Because I look at this from a Burnley fan perspective. Their club is £45 million in profit. They didn't owe anybody any money. And as a fan, as a Newcastle fan, you can understand what that feels like. Whatever your opinion is of Mike Ashley, whatever Burnley's opinion was of their old director, their old owner of the club, that's something that you want for your football club. You don't want your team to be in debt. You don't want them to owe people money. So it just baffles me that the Premier League have allowed this to happen. It's inconsistent, isn't it? Because I'm always going to compare it to Newcastle. Whatever reasons they had not to sanction our takeover, how come you're going to allow a team like Burnley to be put in a worse position than they were previously? So if you're all for making it fair in the Premier League, if you're all for keeping clubs stable and not going into financial ruin, then how have they allowed this to happen? And it worries me, actually, because if we were to get taken over by not the PCP or maybe somebody else, it brings you a bit of fear. Because, our situation is quite mirrored to Burnley's in the fact that we are running at a profit. So that could very well happen to us. Someone could come in, take over the club, and financially make us a lot worse. So I feel loads of sympathy for the Burnley fans. I'm always going to look at it from the fans' point of view, and I feel nothing but sympathy for them because they're going to, when they go back to the games, they're going to be spending money on tickets, giving money to the club, and that's going straight out to whoever these guys are. That's loaning the money. Not towards players, which is what you want your money to go towards. It's not going to go towards that. It's going to go towards the debt that hangs over your club. And I just think it's really irresponsible of the Premier League. It's really irresponsible of was it the XL? Is that what the consortium's called?
ALK Capital is that?
ALK, sorry. I don't know how anybody can run a business like that. How has he got the money that he has? How has he acquired the amount of millions that he has by going for deals like this? It's absolute nonsense.
They come from Wall Street, apparently. They're based in Wall Street brokers, and but I think you're right. It does beg the question as to how they've come in this situation. Apparently, the situation is that they've used some of the club's own money that they already had to buy the club, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense. Rob, what do you make of this? Do you think that it does beg the question as to how they managed to pass the owners and directors test to get to this situation?
I think it's important to note that this deal is not dissimilar to the one we saw with the Glazer family at Manchester United. Correct. It's a leverage buyout. Now, the big key here, which I think Stephen's kind of touched on, is, well, to put it simply, Burnley aren't Manchester United in terms of revenues. So where the Glazers, yes, have levelled a lot of debt against Manchester United, it's something like £1 billion now. The revenue that Man United bring in is night and day compared to pretty much everyone else in the Premier League, bar maybe City and Liverpool. They're a long way ahead of the Newcastles, Burnleys, Evertons of the world. So that is a concern, I think. But as I say, it's a leverage buyout. This is the complexity of the business world sometimes. They've used, as Stephen said, there was something like 45 million in the bank at Burnley. They've used 30 to 40 million of that to pay the selling shareholders. They've taken a loan worth about 60 million from a company called MSD UK Holdings. Now, this is an investment firm headed up by Michael Dell. Dell should be the giveaway of what his background is. But Burnley aren't the only ones to borrow money from MSD. Southampton and Derby have done it as well during this pandemic to help keep them going. So there's all these kind of weird dark arts of the business world going on. And I've touched on this for True Faith recently, writing about the Newcastle takeover, because, ALK have come in, Alan Pace, their new chairman, they're basically a private company. And it's a similar situation in other takeovers in the UK, and maybe to a point even with Manchester City, who were bought out by a company which were classed as private equity. And again, it's the dark arts of the business world, and this is where Newcastle, I think, fell down with the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, because that's a sovereign wealth fund. So as soon as you start talking about sovereign wealth funds, you'll start talking about state ownership. I think that's where the Premier League got very concerned about the consortium looking to buy Newcastle, because the PIF were going to have an 80% share of Newcastle United. And there's a big difference, I think, from sovereign wealth, certainly in business terms, a sovereign wealth fund buying it and making it state-owned, to ALK buying Burnley and saying, well, look, we've borrowed this money from here, this money from here, this is our business plan. You know what? The thing is, this business plan is it probably hinges on them staying in the Premier League, which may have been touch and go for a little bit there before sort of Fulham and West Brom started to tail off again. Yeah, it's such it looks unseemly, especially to your man on the street in layman's terms. It didn't look good at Manchester United with the Glazers, and it doesn't look good now. But as I say, there's a dark arts and black magic type situation going on here, where Alan Price, the new chairman at Burnley, is likening the situation to a mortgage. They've basically leveraged this against Burnley Football Club and Turf Moor and saying, well, it's like a mortgage. We'll pay it off in the same way you'd pay off the mortgage on your house. Whether that's actually going to work out, I don't know. Again, I think it probably depends on them staying in the Premier League, because the TV contracts are so massive that they make Premier League clubs worth X amount more than even some of the other big European clubs. But it hinges on them staying there. Obviously, they're going to need money to invest in the team. I think Sean Dyche has done brilliantly on a shoestring budget, and the previous sort of ownership did well to keep them ticking over nicely without having to borrow money. But you do have to invest occasionally. So where's that money going to come from? Is that more borrowing? Are they going to recoup that through TV? For all the criticisms of Mike Ashley, Newcastle have ticked over and he's invested where he's needed to. Callum Wilson being a prime example, this season. Joe Linton, maybe that was poorly spent money, but they spent the money to bring him in. It's not like Newcastle haven't spent money to try and maintain their position. Are Burnley going to be able to do the same? These questions are all up in the air, and the new ownership have been kind of secretive about it, which I don't think has helped the situation. It's what has raised some of the question marks here. And as I said, yes, it does look unseemly, but it's not unfamiliar territory for the Premier League, Manchester United being the comparison. And it's also a little bit different to the Newcastle takeover because of the nature of the companies coming in to buy out the club.
Now, on that matter there, Rob, you've touched on Newcastle's ongoing takeover saga. Coming to you next, Lee. What are your thoughts on the current situation with that? Because it seems to never, ever go away. There seems to be constant rumblings in the background. What are your thoughts?
Well, if I could just quickly jump back to Rob's earlier point about leverage buyouts and Manchester United and so on. I think Manchester United, albeit you'll hear Manchester United fans whinging and moaning about it, I think that's a successful version of a leverage buyout. But it's only been successful because of the revenues that they generate that they've been able to plough back into the team. Yeah, whilst the Glazers laden Man United with 500 million worth of debt when they took over, the reinvestment has been there, but that's because of the revenue that they were guaranteed from the Premier League and the Man United brand. We've seen a far, far less successful version of a leverage buyout, very, very close to home. 8 miles down the road from Barratt Road, Stuart Donald effectively did exactly the same thing when he bought Sunderland. Look at the difference in revenues. The revenues weren't coming in. They weren't successful. They dropped down the league, and it went tits up. And that's the risk that Burnley have now got, because if Burnley have one poor season, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility they get relegated in the next 18 months, it's not. Yeah, they're in a similar sort of situation to the situation our friends down the road found themselves in under, Stuart Donald and Charlie Methven. So, I think the Man United version of a leverage buyout ticks a lot of boxes, successful. But with Burnley is a far bigger risk associated to it. Coming on to Newcastle, it literally depends on who you believe. We keep hearing arbitration's going to be potentially coming to an end by the end of this calendar month. The question I've got is, what is the arbitration seeking to achieve? Nobody knows whether the arbitration is seeking to achieve compensation for Mike Ashley, whether the arbitration is seeking to sort of progress the takeover. There's still that big white elephant in the room about the fact that PIF, back in July, publicly announced that they were no longer looking to buy the club. You hear rumours and counter rumours that they're still at the table and what have you, but the last official communication we got from PIF was they pulled out of the deal. And that's, for me, a sensible way to look at where we are, because if you look at it that way, there's nobody at the table willing to buy the club, i.e. PIF. You're not going to be disappointed if it doesn't happen, but you're going to go absolutely balmy if it does. Do you know what I mean? So I literally, I've given up thinking about it wherever I possibly can. It's all over social media. Some people will have you believe it's going to be complete by the end of the month. Some people have you believe that there's nobody at the table. It's probably one of the most painful experiences I've had as a Newcastle fan in almost 40 years. Because me, I'm just here for the football, but this has just been a distraction. And the other thing I would say is this is now, if you ask me, beginning to damage the club. I think it's now having a serious impact on the club because whereas Mike Ashley in the past wasn't willing to invest, he's far less willing to invest his cash now, any of his cash or even the club's cash, because he may be gone in 6 weeks, 8 months, who knows. So yeah, it's a millstone around the club's neck at the minute that I just wish one way or the other was put to bed.
I absolutely agree with Lee. A resolution is needed one way or the other.
Yeah.
I think if it's dead in the water, everybody can move on. There'll be disappointment. I understand that. People will be disappointed because they see this as the way to get Ashley off Tyneside. I understand why everyone wants that, including Ashley himself, if we're honest. He seems to be motivated to sell. He's had enough, for lack of a better term. My understanding of the arbitration case is that Ashley is bringing this about because he wants to determine whether or not, or however you want to term it, there is separation between the PIF and the Saudi state. Because we come back to that word state ownership again. And he wants to determine if there is separation, because if they can prove there is separation, well, what's blocking this takeover? You know, there's no good reason, especially if the TV rights piracy thing is sorted out, which it slowly seems to be getting sorted out in the Middle East. What stops this takeover happening? What Ashley wants out of the arbitration? Well, to me, it's either he wants the takeover to go ahead for a couple of reasons. One of them is that because the PIF is involved, he could probably get paid in one lump sum. He could get his 300 million or close to in one go, and he could get out. The other thing is he's got a lot of other business interests, and he could look for either investment via the PIF or opportunities in the Middle East of his own. So he's got reasons, even if they are selfish, to want this takeover to go ahead. The other thing is, if they say yay or nay either way, he might say to the Premier League, well, look, you've wasted my time, you've wasted this money, you've wasted this and that and the other. I want a bit of compensation, please. So he's recouping some of the losses. And let's not be mistaken, his business empire will have lost a lot of money during the pandemic, not just Newcastle, but Sports Direct, all these other ones that he's got a stake in will have lost money during the pandemic. So one way or the other, there's, I think, money in it for him, potentially. But there's also a resolution for everybody, Ashley included, because if he loses the case, that's probably at least this is dead. And then maybe it means other interested parties come forward, because we keep hearing rumours that other people are interested, but for whatever reason, they don't make themselves known publicly right now. And that may be because of this arbitration, because there is still this thin hope that Amanda Staveley's consortium can come in and actually purchase the club.
I don't know where this confidence around the arbitration case emanates from, to be perfectly honest with you, because the consortium was offered arbitration, to my knowledge, in summer 2020. And I believe the arbitration was offered to try and confirm whether there was a separation between Mohammed bin Salman and the state of Saudi Arabia and the PIF, and it was refused then. What do we think potentially could have changed in between now and then that leads a lot of people in the media to believe that this is now going to go ahead? It's a strange one.
Oh, I was going to see, Stephen, do you have any thoughts on the matter?
I totally agree with everything that the lads have said. I think going forward, as Newcastle United fans, I think all we can do, and it is easier said than done, because every time you look on Twitter or any social media outlet and you see the word takeover, you obviously get excited. They want to know what's involved. But I think as fans, just for our mental health, our state of mind, we just need to try and put it at the back of our mind. And until Sky Sports or whoever else confirms it first, until they say Mike Ashley is leaving Newcastle, have been bought, then, I mean, as poor as the football is at the moment, I'm just trying to concentrate on supporting my team still. It is very difficult, obviously, but we are still a Premier League club. Hopefully, we will still be a Premier League club next season, and for as long as that continues, and for as long as I am still alive, I will support Newcastle. That's never going to change, whether we've got Mike Ashley running the show or somebody else. So, because last year I was the same as I think you mentioned before. You spent nearly all day, every day, just reading different things about the takeover, and you said you spent 12 hours a day, like just scrolling through Twitter and refreshing the page just to see what will come up next. And it's not healthy, is it? It's really not healthy. So, yeah, personally, I'm just going to try and put it at the back of my mind and get behind the team. Hopefully, we can keep getting some, from previous results and against Southampton. Hopefully, we can keep picking up some points.
I think it's wise to take the approach. If it happens, it happens. Great. If it doesn't, it doesn't, and we move on. We talked about bringing it, affair to a conclusion. But what I would like to say is, if it does happen, and I know it's a big if, the only person who I would like to see announce this live on television is Richard Keys. I want to see Richard Keys squirm and announce this live to the viewing world. That would make my year, it would.
That would be an interesting sight, certainly. Certainly, just his comments back in the summer about it all were not great. And I think it did affect a lot of the mental health of Newcastle supporters just because of what he was saying. And then we were hearing conflicting things from other people. It wasn't great. And even now it's not brilliant just because of the whole rumbling on in the background. Some people are still constantly checking their Twitters, waiting for updates. And it's not great. And I think given the situation on field, which isn't brilliant in itself, that has to be more important at the moment because I believe we're in a bit of a relegation fight at the moment. So as far as I'm concerned, that has to take priority at the moment. Certainly, moving finally things on to the state of affairs on field. Saturday's win over Southampton saw loanee Joe Willott make his debut for Newcastle United. He is an attacking midfielder, certainly someone that we don't have at the club in terms of other personnel, in terms of how he plays on the pitch. John Joe Shelby, Jeff Hendrick, the Longstaff brothers don't seem to be as an attacking force as Joe Willott in terms of box-to-box running. So do we think that the introduction and arrival of Joe Willott will help change our style as a team in the way we play? I'll come to Rob first on this matter.
I think it was a hell of a debut for young Joe Willott. I think the thing that impressed me is the energy he brought. And we've had comparisons to Gini Wijnaldum and Kevin Nolan in the wake of that debut. And as I said, it was how dynamic he was. It was how energetic he was, even down to 9 men as it was at the end. He's chasing, he's running, he's harrying, he's playing his part defensively. But obviously he was getting forward as well. He scored, and it's the kind of performance we've needed in the middle of the park for quite some time now, because Jeff Hendrick hasn't been great. I mean, I thought he played quite well against Everton, but for most of the year, he's been questioned what his place is in the side. I mean, his role has even been under question. He's played wide right, central. Shelby looked like he was playing with a rugby ball for most of the game against Southampton. I don't know what he was doing. And he's, again, not had a great year. I mean, occasionally he brings these magic balls out and you think, okay, well, he's got that in him. No pun intended. But he just doesn't do it regularly enough, and he's not. There's no speed there. Defensively, he becomes a liability as a result because he just can't track back with any real meaning. Whereas Willott, he showed the ability to get about, box to box, side to side, as somebody put it, I think on the True Faith podcast after the game at the weekend. It was a fantastic debut. He showed all the signs that you want to see of a young player, of a new player with your club, and he's brought some youthful energy, not just on the field but also off it. On social media and interviews, he's talking up, getting the club where it should be, and it's just positivity, and it's the kind of injection that I think the team needed, especially in playing this new system where having an energetic central player like that really can make it tick.
Stephen, do you think that because of the way Joe Willott plays in the box-to-box fashion, that he and his style of play could end up bringing the best out of other players who perhaps haven't been performing of late?
Most definitely. I think when you look at that run we had, that winless run we had before the Everton win, service was almost it just wasn't there, was it, to Wilson? And Shelvey's long balls, they're ineffective when we've got 10 men behind the ball because the ball gets pumped forward. Wilson can control it, he will bring it down, but there's nobody around him. And then all of a sudden he's got 2 defenders on him, ball's lost, and then we are defending again. So having someone with the energy and the pace that Willocks has to pick the ball up in our own half and play it forward and then get forward himself as quickly as he does, it really helps Wilson. It helps Wilson release the ball and then make whatever run he needs to make. What I was really impressed with actually with Willocks was when the ball was going into the box against Southampton, he was, I think on 3 or 4 occasions he was on the end of it. I think he had a couple of shots he got or a couple of touches in Southampton's area. Well, it's something that we've been missing for, I think, since Steve Bruce has been in charge. Someone who has that energy. I know we've got St. Maximin, we've got Almiron, but they've been asked to do, well, Almiron certainly has been asked to do more defensive duties since Steve Bruce has been there. But it just seems like Willocks hopefully will be allowed to have that freedom to push high up the pitch and connect with Wilson. Wilson needs it. Wilson can't hold the ball up as well as he does for 90 minutes and expect to get anything out of the game. You need someone to support him. And I think Willocks definitely going to do that. I think you're going to see him pop up in the box quite often. I think he's going to get quite a few goals as well. He seems to have a good finish. And it's really exciting. Yeah, it was a good move. It was a good transfer.
Lee, any final thoughts on this matter?
I would just ask one thing, to be perfectly honest with you. I'd ask Newcastle fans to just try and temper their expectations a little bit.
Yeah.
He's had a cracking debut. Yeah, he's a young lad, 21. He's played 1 game before he turned up at Newcastle this season. He would have been running on fumes. You'd have been running on fumes and adrenaline on Saturday. It would have been his chance to start a game in the Premier League. Don't get me wrong, I thought it was fantastic. When was the last time you saw a midfielder from Newcastle's midfield arriving late into the box? What he will do, he'll give St. Maximin, he'll give Miggy more options if they sort of can skin a fullback. They'll lift their head up. Invariably in the past, what they've got is Wilson to offer. And that's it. Going forward, you would never see a Hendrick or a Shelvey arriving late in the box the way Willocks did for the first goal on Saturday. But as I say, I would just ask everybody to just manage their expectations on the lad, because what I would hate to see is him have such a promising debut. And let's be honest, it was promising. He must have been blown out of his arse on Saturday night, having played 1 game all season and then played 30 minutes for 10 men and 20 minutes for 9 men. But let's not build him up to something that where if he doesn't have such a good game this coming week against Chelsea, everybody's on his back and all of a sudden he's crap and he's this and he's that, and all of a sudden he starts to chip away at that confidence. Let's just allow him to ease himself in. He's 21-year-old. He's clearly got a bit of talent. He's clearly got an engine on him. But let's just, as I say, just temper the expectations of the lad a little bit. Andy sounds like Dizzy Rascal.
I fully agree, Lee. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for tonight. So thank you all very much for joining me. The show will be back next week with some new guests, a new host, but of course, more discussion. As I mentioned at the start, if you do want to be part of things like this, Right for True Faith, be on shows like this as part of True Faith, head to the Twitter and get in touch. So thank you all very much for watching. Hope you've all enjoyed. As I say, thank you all very much for joining me tonight. And the show will be back next week. Goodbye.
No worries. Cheers, guys. See ya.